I'm pleased to join in the discussion here about the evolutionary growth and what it means for the mayors and cities represented here today, and for the business community to, in some cases, start moving in this direction, in other cases, continue, and looking forward to real excellence. I might add a quick word from my local colleagues. Some of you are probably thinking, it might be recessed in the back of your mind, but I know it's there. Why do we need a governor to come in and tell all us local officials what to do? And so let me emphasize, I was governor for 8 years, but I was also for 23 years in local office, city, county council, executive. So don't be too alarmed by the state title. That's the thing in my mind. I will tell you with some modesty that I was very pleased that Maryland started the first statewide program in smart growth in the entire country in the 1990s. And we started as a better way to build and to maintain our towns and our cities, and we're focusing on housing and transportation choices that are near jobs and retail and schools and economic activity. We also saw it as a way of protecting our major asset, the Chesapeake Bay. In saying we started this, I also want to give quick attention to the great work that the state of Oregon and Washington did in years prior to that, but we took a different approach, and it's been absolutely phenomenal the way it's spread around the country. Just back 2 days ago from Seattle, where they're working on some extraordinary things in transportation-oriented development, and indeed it's spread around the world. I've been to China and Turkey and Australia, and places in Europe, all working on exactly these issues. As soon as we started Smart Growth, though, and really started talking about it, the perception was quickly established that smart growth was really only for big cities, and indeed that somehow the perception was mostly about coastal areas. I guess maybe because of some of the earlier states in there. But that perception really was fueled in some cases by the critics of smart growth, and I would hear these things. And first time it popped up, it was a relatively small town, about 40,000 people in Maryland, Salisbury, and someone in the audience said, "Don't Manhattanize Salisbury. We don't want to be Manhattan." Bringing it closer to home, I was speaking several years ago over at Hofstra, University of Long Island, and they said, "We're not going to make Long Island like Manhattan, are we?" And so this is part of what we have to deal with, and as local officials know immediately, the density issue all becomes a major concern. It's also ironic that becomes one of the arguments, because as many of you know, zoning laws were first started in Manhattan to try to regulate the growth that was occurring there. Smart growth really works for all kinds of places. It's not limited by size. It can be large, it can be small, rural, suburban, urban. We're literally working with communities of 2,500 people where they're doing smart growth and creating a town center there, so that the new shopping center is not 6 stores located on a strip outside of town. Over time, we evolved how we talk about smart growth. When we first started the discussion, it was primarily about environmental principles. It was about preserving open space and conservation. It was about revitalization. It was protecting our water supply and great waterways, the Chesapeake Bay in particular. But over the years, we've learned that while that's important, that is not what is really important to most Americans. Most Americans say, yes, I want to protect the environment, but what they're really worried about is the employment and the fiscal case and how government spends its money. And so we have refocused the language of smart growth to make the case, make it very clear that what we're talking about is fiscal issues that also happen to be good for the environment. Strong, fiscally conservative, fiscally responsible policy can encourage the right decisions for the environment and protect open spaces and natural areas as well. We're using the same tools as before, constantly modified and upgraded, and very excited about them, but we now highlight the returns on investment for both the public sector and the private sector, saving money, promoting private sector investment, creating jobs, addressing economic inequality and creating partnerships to deal with these issues. For example, when considering a proposal for a new subdivision, one of the first things that really ought to be asked is why should the taxpayers subsidize, pay for the roads, the sewers, the lines, new schools, and everything else, just because someone would like to make a private sector investment out there somewhere. And instead, say, bring it in the context of what we're doing in smart growth, and we will work as partners with you, and at the same time, save a lot of money for the public sector and the private sector. That not only costs the taxpayers, but it ended up being contrary to environmental goals, and furthers, in many cases, the inequalities in our community. Both zoning and smart growth must continue to change in response to major forces that are impacting our world today. As we look at the rebirth of urban neighborhoods and downtowns, it is evident that our policies to date have been largely reactionary. We should remember that the reality is, and this will be dismaying to some of my elected colleagues here, but the reality is that most people do not wake up one day and start thinking about the environment, or call their local council member or mayor and ask what they are doing about smart growth. I can tell you, in fact, even as governor, I rarely have, those nationwide, rarely have someone look at me, I really want to talk to you about smart growth. However, when those policy decisions negatively impact everyday life, that's when you'll hear about it. From the sprawl, from the loss of the environment, from the decline of economic viability. And that is why we're here today. We're going to have a few questions with the panel, and then we'll come back to some forces that, in fact, are moving the entire country in this direction. Thank you.
Thanks. Maybe we can start with the state level, and what, from your perspective, Commissioner McDonald, and the state do, or is the state doing to move this agenda forward in smart growth?
Sure. I think having the perspective of both Connecticut and New York, both have been leaders in smart growth and sustainability. And while Governor Glendening is the modern leader in sustainability and smart growth, I often argue that Cornelius Vanderbilt was the original leader in TOD, because with the building of the railroads here in New York and Connecticut, the towns that sprung up around these railroads are great examples of TOD on all three lines. So we've been doing it for a long time here in this part of the world, Governor, and we welcome you to the fold. I think since 2011, smart growth may have taken a little bit of a backseat to resiliency. We've all experienced Irene, Sandy, Lee, and how we look at things as people in government, people in development, to deal with those very real issues of extreme weather and climate. And I would argue that you need to incorporate both. You need to have both resiliency and smart growth, as well as technology, in planning, development, but most importantly in funding. Now, I think what the two states realize is that while they can set the stage and provide different programs, it really needs to be, smart growth really needs to be locally driven. And Governor Cuomo recognized that in 2011 when he turned the economic development world upside down in the state and said, we're no longer going to do economic development from Albany and New York City, we're going to be doing it regionally through the Regional Economic Development Councils. And one of his major initiatives in this year's budget is $100 million for smart growth initiative for downtown revitalization. And each of these 10 regional economic development councils is going to select one community in its region that is losing population and work with them on developing a downtown revitalization plan to bring back employment, to make investments in transportation, and to increase housing and work with the local institutions. That is a huge deal, and I think that is the wave of the future. In Connecticut, when I was Commissioner of Economic and Community Development were together. They are split now. I think having them together is important because you can drive the discussion whether it be through tax credits, brownfields funding, HUD Small Cities programs, to really get developers and communities to the table and find out how to do that revitalization. So lots of good programs out there, and the states are doing a great job, and our communities are as well.
Okay, thank you. So, curious, so we know money flowing and planning from the state level, but what do the developers need? What do the developers need in order to make smart growth happen with your project? So Alex, do you want to talk about that a bit?
Yeah, I think, first of all, I'll just say smart growth is what we do. I mean, that's all I've been doing for over 30 years. And it's pretty logical when you break it down, from whether you're talking about the environment, city planning, architecture, transportation, it's all there. If you think of what we have here, just in Westchester, we have, $1 trillion worth of infrastructure. To not do something at those, we're just wasting our money. So back in the 90s, locally, I joined a company called Avalon Bay, which was a multi-family REIT, and we were basically a suburban developer. I was put in charge of basically high-rise and mid-rise development for them, doing that city stuff. And the first thing I said is, look, let's put our apartments at every train station in Westchester, which starts and all around the New York region. And that's why we ended up doing it in one of our first spots, as well as Bronxville and Mamaroneck and White Plains and a lot of other spots over time. So what turned from a crazy idea was definitely embraced. So that did give me an experience to interface with a lot of different local governments. Also, we do a lot of work in Boston and New York City, which have their challenges as well. So to answer the question, maybe I'll just tick off maybe 8 things. First of all, I think it starts with the people in the government. We need forward-thinking government, and obviously a lot of them here. And with leadership and professional staff who really can work with us and think outside the box. Because there are a lot of things that don't fit from our planning and zoning in many of these towns that have to be readopted, and that's a challenge. And the government who understands really and embraces smart growth. Second is vision. We need a city with a vision of the future based on a well-conceived, long-term smart growth land use plan that's been adopted and embraced by the community. I totally agree with you. You need to get economic development, community development. Otherwise, you've got them in separate rooms, and all they want to do is yell at each other when you bring them together. So they've got to work on it together. A lot of cities aren't doing much planning anymore. Unfortunately, what's happened is the plans that do happen are often abstract. They don't involve the economic issues, so by the time they roll out, they look beautiful, they're aspirational, but they don't pencil, so we can't do anything on them. Instead, cities often are now sort of leaving it to developers to take that site and then try to figure something out, and inevitably that leads to friction between community and development because the city's sitting in the background waiting to see how it goes. Well, any city here, town here should get in the middle of it and show both sides what makes sense. Next one I'll tick off is environmental. And we really need cities who understand the environmental benefits of smart growth, and that's anywhere from the brownfield program that we have in the state of New York, which is probably one of the best in the country, that recognizes that to take wastelands that we still have in a lot of our cities, whether they're decayed waterfronts or whether they're train lines that have been abandoned, we need to really something to spur that because it costs a lot of money to get those started before you can even think about putting a building on them. We also need cities who understand the intrinsic environmental benefits of mixed use, basically so that you can walk from one to the other and you don't have to get in your car every time. And we need cities and states who understand how to go through the environmental review process and work together to come up with the best solution. Number 4 is zoning. We need flexible zoning that supports mixed use and smart growth and can change when the market demands. So by that I mean hot residential market dies, office comes back, you need to be able to change those locations and change the building types that fit on them. Next, an ideal, what they've just adopted in New Rochelle actually is form-based zoning. If anybody doesn't know about it, you should learn about it. But it's a much more enlightened way to sort of physically think about what can go in different sites. Next, transportation. We need access to a well-run transit system, which we're fortunate to have here. And we need cities that understand improving transit and mixed use and making cities walkable and bikeable means less cars and lowering your parking ratios. Every time we build a parking garage, we're throwing money out the window that could go into better buildings to live in and work in. I'm almost done. Economics. We need government to understand the true economics and risk of development so that they can talk to the community about that too. We're not just the bad developer versus the community. Housing, we need government that understands that meeting our nation's affordable housing needs will never be solved by simply taxing the real estate and housing development community. That's been tried everywhere, but in the old days, the feds, the state, local used to fund affordable housing. Today, it's mostly a tax on the development of one single entity. So it's sort of like the way we tax gasoline for highways. That works because it's a much bigger base. We need to spread that cost around if we ever want to catch up and then meet that problem. Lastly, leadership. In the end, we need a leader in the community who can champion smart growth and keep everybody moving forward. I can't overemphasize that. I mean, if there isn't that such a person, a lot of these towns just don't get off the ground. And we need cooperative city officials who can put their political differences aside and focus on the greater good of making their cities a better place to live. Thanks.
Thank you, Alex. Well, that list, all the municipalities that need to go now and get to work, we've got a long list. Or maybe you can help to prioritize. What are the key things? All those are necessary, but if they can, limited resources, limited capacity, what do they focus on?
Right, thank you very much. Collins Enterprises has been doing the kind of work that Alex and I know Kim in the audience from Spinnaker has been doing for the last 25 years. We recognized back in the 80s that plowing of cornfields and suburban sprawl, as John was talking about, was not for the market, and towns weren't going to support it up and down in New York State as well as in Connecticut. So we turned early on to putting vacant properties back in the stream of commerce, redeveloping and refurbishing buildings in urban centers, trying to do, in fact, Alex and I joint ventured on a project in Bronxville to redevelop an abandoned and a contaminated site next to the train station. We saw that as the future, and we've continued to basically build in that realm for the time being. And just as basically Alex said it, but I can tell you this, that we need, first of all, three things. We need a pro-business administration that we're dealing with. And Alex talked about leadership, being willing to assist, assist developers to get private investment back into their towns. We also need a master plan, and Alex talked about putting together rules for zoning and so forth, and making it so that there's guidelines for us to follow. There's many towns that have a special permit process that has actually gotten out of hand. We were talking about it with some of the Buchanan people here. The town that I come from, for instance, they're analyzing and reviewing so many different details of individual plans that the process is taking forever to get a special permit approved. So putting those rules and illustrations, and hiring, basically there's a lot of very good pros out there that know how to do this planning on a small scale as well as a large scale. We see that in every town that actually employs those kinds of planners, we find actually can get things done more efficiently, and private investment is then drawn to it. And the third thing we talk about sometimes is financial incentives, and maybe financial incentives can, in some cities, really need to happen. Our experience in Yonkers, as an example, we took advantage of the brownfield credits from the state, and that really came through some of the economic development people that the city of Yonkers had that were able to basically work with us on a public-private partnership, basically set the stage for private investment to go into that city. The city paid for some of the public infrastructure, got the MTA as an example to improve the train station. I mean, these are the kinds of complementary activities that when you actually put this stuff in place, all of a sudden private investment will be incentivized to be in your town. So altogether, those are my three major things. And I can tell you, it's very easy. You can go to many of these towns, whether it's Yonkers, the Alexander Street Master Plan, or whether you go to Rochelle and what Mayor Branson's done there. I mean, it's not rocket science, and we just need to follow these patterns, scale it for your own city, And you'll see private investment, I think, will grow substantially.
Let me just comment on a few major forces that are really driving the use of smart growth and land use strategies in general. There are all kinds of impacts, and they vary by area, but three major things are going on in our country. The first force is our country's changing demographics, specifically the impact of two huge generations. First, let me talk briefly about the millennials. There are over 83 million millennials coming online. Think about the economic impact. What shaped suburban America with the cars were 75 million baby boomers. So there's even more millennials than there were baby boomers. Baby boomers today represent about 1/4 of the nation's population. And what you have to keep in mind is they think differently. For example, 60% of the college graduates today decide where they want to live and then go look for a job there. When I was going to get out of college, it was where's the job, and that's where I went. And what this means then is companies used to go someplace and people would come to them to work. Now, companies must go to where the shiny price coming out of college are. And they have entirely different lifestyles. They do not mind working to 9 o'clock at night, but when they come down that elevator and go out that door, they want to be able to go join some friends for a quick drink. They want to be able to walk home and meet with their wife and walk out to dinner or whatever it might be. My son Raymond, who's now 35, called me a decade ago, and he was in Boise, Idaho, and he said, "Dad, have you ever been to Boise?" And I said, "No, I haven't." And since then, but he said, "You know, this is really a neat town. I could see myself living here." Now, once you get a 25-year-old saying, "I can see myself living here," half of the economic development battle is over. A recent study by Smart Growth America found that businesses are relocating to attract the millennials as their employees. This study, which is called Core Values, and along with a couple of other studies, by the way, listed in your program. And let me emphasize, you can go online for our website and get all those studies that I'm mentioning right now. You can download it for free, and so on, and hopefully it'll be of some assistance to you. But we studied over 500 companies that have relocated or expanded in downtowns over the last 5 years. Some of the downtowns be a suburban, relatively small downtown, but they made a movement. The majority of those were in technology or knowledge-based industries. The majority of them also cited that the main reason for moving was to be able to attract the millennial workforce. And what they were seeking was walkable, transit-oriented communities. They were seeking mixed use, and they understood that the ability to get the shiniest, brightest person coming out of college to live in a traditional suburban subdivision and a traditional office park simply wasn't selling. We see this in my home state of Maryland. Marriott Corporation headquarters, one of our larger employees, has announced that they are moving from their suburban office style and they're going to relocate in the metropolitan area. Number one criteria must be on a transit line. Everything else is excluded. FBI is relocating its headquarters from downtown for the resiliency purposes as well, from downtown Washington, D.C. to the suburbs. Number one qualifier must be on a transit line. And you will see this more and more in the future as millennials start to really reshape our economy. This is happening in suburban downtowns as well. In Maryland, many of you have heard of the community of Bethesda. It is a community, not even a city, but it has adopted overwhelmingly the smart growth central city type development and has become world famous for the patterns there. This is happening in White Plains and Brewster and Stamford, South Florida, places in Connecticut and New York as well. You can see these changes. The other part of the equation, the older, the other generation, is the baby boomers. Seniors increasingly have changed the pattern, and it's hard to figure out exactly why, but they've done it. And they want now increasingly to age in place. Maybe it's because of healthy, maybe it's technology, but they've changed. And they do not necessarily want to move to South Florida or South Carolina or senior homes. They want to age in place. They need the ability to age in place by requiring changes in zoning codes that allows things like granny flats and accessory dwelling units, and even the thing that's sweeping across the station of the tiny homes, if you follow that at all, or the micro units. They need more transportation options. They need safe, walkable streets, and they need gathering places. They need that third place in their life. And they also need transit to connect them to continued employment and the other amenities. Within this population change that I've just talked about, we also must keep our eye on the growing diversity. By 2040, we will be a nation that has majority-minority population. And communities must embrace this cultural awareness that will make it even stronger and recognize and incorporate that into the policy. And most of these populations are very oriented toward having a urban, walkable lifestyle. The second force that's driving the country towards smart growth and the tools is the shift in the economic development needs. The heart really of the American economy increasingly is the knowledge-based portion of the economy. Office parks increasingly just do not work in attracting or retaining the knowledge-based companies. Just as a quick example, you can see in the slide here as well, one of the most famous office parks was the Research Triangle Park in Raleigh, North Carolina. They are totally rebuilding that. They are tearing down those buildings. They are making them mixed use. They're bringing residents and retail into the park. And they have a new transit line coming to connect the research park with the 3 universities and with the 3 downtowns. When we were down there working with them and I asked why, they said that the companies were moving out of the research park to go to downtown Durham or Raleigh or whatever. They're becoming a new downtown in order to survive. Here in White Plains, places like the Exchange and other developments along the Platinum Mile are looking to invest in life, work, play models. Must put a focus, by the way, on more pedestrian accessibility between those things. I was looking at that last night. Communities are recognizing that placemaking is an important economic development tool. This is the topic of another report that is listed in your program. Coupled with the cost of government and tougher budgets, the question really should be how much can be wasted on sprawl development versus infill development. John and I had dinner last night on the Central Avenue, and I'm looking at this kind of sprawl, one-piece development up and down, and most of you know Central Avenue. I'm thinking, what a grand boulevard that could be, walkable, width of that road already, and fill in those parking lots and other things. It could be something that connects the entire community. It was just there waiting to jump out. I can see it. It was a good restaurant, but I could also see this. We've estimated, calculated really, the smart growth development, when you're looking at the economics of it, in general, the costs are 1/3 less for upfront infrastructure. That's for both public and the private sector. It saves an average of 10% on ongoing delivery of services, and it generates 10 times more tax revenue per acre than conventional suburban development. I mean, everyone should really keep that in mind as we think about the pressure on the budgets. One quick example. In Raleigh, the 0.9, must emphasize, 0.9 square miles of the central business district generates 60 times more dining tax revenue than the whole 800 other miles of the county. Think of that, 0.9 of 1 mile, 60 times more dining revenues than the entire 800 square mile county. This is an approach really that increases prosperity, it generates a better bottom line for businesses, and these are the places that attract employees and the businesses that want those employees. Regions with the most commercial development in a walkable urban places report that we just released also show about 1/3 higher GDP per capita. This trend is explored in that report. Again, you're welcome to go to it. It's called Foot Traffic Ahead, which predicts how walkable our metropolitan areas will be in the future. I'll stop here. We'll get some more questions and applications and then come back and finish this up.
Thank you, Governor. So, we've been hearing a lot about trends, I think, for a while now. And the question may be, how are those trends actually playing out? Westchester, Fairfield County, maybe Mayor, you could start and tell us, give us an example of those trends playing out and how you've had to respond as a mayor.
Sure. First of all, let me say it's really a pleasure to be a part of this gathering. I'm enjoying the governor's comments very, very much. So much so that I'm willing to overlook his outrageous reference to White Plains and Stanford as the models of success, when we all know that Yonkers and New Rochelle are the only communities worth looking at. So you're in that comment. And I was struck earlier by Joan's comment about Cornelius Vanderbilt, and it really is true the degree to which the new urbanism is just the old urbanism revisited once again. But the governor and others like him do deserve enormous credit for bringing those values into the modern era and expressing them in the new circumstances that we have today. And the good news is that as a result of that, what was really sort of pioneering and innovative in the 1990s is now the commonly accepted wisdom. Now, I literally don't know any municipal official who would not agree with the planning principles that have been articulated today. And that's an enormous and positive change. So let me say a couple of words about how this has played out in New Rochelle and why I think it's important, and then why I think there still are some significant challenges that we ought not to be blind to. So what we've tried to do in New Rochelle is really follow the advice that Alex and Art laid out in their own comments. And that is create a master plan that governs our downtown area and attempts to the greatest degree possible to create a clear path for investment, provided that investment reflects the planning principles and the vision of the city. So the three essential components. First, we have a master development agreement with a strong, well-capitalized partner, RDRXR. They have an exclusive on city-owned properties within our downtown overlay. And that's helpful because on one hand, it sends a positive signal to the business community. When a strong capital partner is putting their bets on New Rochelle, it says, come on in, the water's fine. And because they have an interest in multiple properties, they don't simply want to stimulate investment on one site. They want to make sure that there's a holistic view, that each piece of growth strengthens the whole. So that's one. Two, we've adopted a form-based code, as Alex mentioned earlier, which provides, in our case, unprecedented flexibility with respect to use, and therefore the capacity to be nimble in response to the marketplace, but is also very prescriptive on design. Incorporating all the best planning practices that we know create the walkable, livable, attractive environment that's critical to bringing in the population that the governor mentioned. And the third piece is a completed environmental review, a generic environmental impact statement that covers the entire downtown overlay up to our projected build-outs. And therefore, any project that comes in consistent with that overall envelope does not need to go through its own environmental review. Those who have gone through the New York State secret process will recognize the significance of that. It is months of time that's wiped away, huge expense that's wiped away, huge uncertainty that's wiped away. It's kind of like a dance to go. And so as a result of those three things, we think that New Rochelle is in a unique position to capitalize on all the trends that make a city like ours a potential model for smart growth. Now, why is this important? A, there's a value locally. And I like the governor's statement, nobody calls me to ask about smart growth. But people do call me all the time to ask why there aren't more stores on Main Street in New Rochelle, or why we don't have more offices in New Rochelle. And so simply recasting abstract academic principles into terms that people can grasp more fully, I think illustrates the local value. There's a regional value. If New York City and its environs are going to compete with Shanghai and Vancouver and Boston and so forth, we have to have the requisite level of population growth and job growth. 5 boroughs can't do it on their own, so cities like ours are going to play a critical role in making sure we get where we need to go as a region. From a social perspective, we've got to have places where our children can live and want to live, otherwise we're going to die. And from a global perspective, you mentioned the tension between smart growth and resilience. Smart growth is an answer to lots of these global problems. I mean, the reason Texas has more per capita greenhouse gas emissions than New York City is not only because Bloomberg and de Blasio may care about these issues more than Perry and Abbott. The reason is the built environment governs your greenhouse gas emissions. The structure of a community is often more impactful than the policies in that community. And so making sure we shape our communities in a way that is sensitive to the way we generate energy and so forth is vital. And lastly, and I'll wrap up, in terms of the challenges, because of what the governor and others have done, we all know what the right thing is. But doing the right thing can still be difficult. And even when you do the right thing, there may be economic obstacles which keep its benefits from being fully realized. So in terms of sort of state-local nexus, planning assistance to help with the significant either costs or in-house expertise necessary to do a lot of this can be absolutely vital. Assistance in telling the story so that the seeker process, for example, does not characterize a tower that's served by mass transit as a net drain on energy, but rather as a net positive compared to the alternative forms of development. And finally, in terms of the pricing structure, the risk-reward ratio that is necessary for someone like Alex or someone like Art to come into a community is often not there, particularly in the distressed communities that most need the investment and which can least afford to make the investments in infrastructure or in tax incentives, which can help them be competitive. And so having an overall state policy that helps assist communities in circumstances like that, I think will be vital to realizing the promise that we all feel.
Thank you. I see a lot of heads nodding. So, Mayor Spano, can you cite like a trend that you're seeing on the ground now that's happening or highlighting?
Absolutely. Let me start by saying, Governor, good to see you. And Jessica, just so you know, when you said before about throwing something at us, we throw too long, where I come from, we throw it back. So remember that. But anyway, it's good to see everyone here. You know, when you think about the economic development and what we're seeing back in our cities here in Westchester County, you just have to, to go back on what the Mayor Rochelle said, was you look at the cost. You know, it costs the same to build a high-rise in New York City than it does to build, you know, a high-rise, let's say, in Westchester County. But we all know that the return, obviously, is much greater in New York City than it would be, let's say, in my own city of Yonkers. So that always tends to be the challenge for us. You know, that the costs are the same, the return's not, and how do we go and then change things around? But you know, I think about some of the success. 4 years ago, we started a Generation Yonkers. That was great for us because we were able to take Generation Y, and incorporate that into a Generation Yonkers, a feel-good campaign to encourage the millennials back to our city. Come to Yonkers. You know why? Because we're the place you want to come, live, work, and play. You know, we use that expression over and over again. And because of that, you know, the development that's happening on the waterfront is tremendous. Yes, pioneers like Collins came in and made those first investments. But now those investments are growing on top of one, on top of the other, where I can then probably show you about 2,000 new units that are in development, in different development stages on the Yonkers waterfront today. And that's good, because not only does it bring bodies, it brings boots, because when you bring the boots to the ground, the businesses will continue to follow. And if you bring those businesses, of course, we can't forget about the arts. We have arts, we have high-tech jobs, all coming to Yonkers, and that is so good for everything that we're working on. When Maya Lynn's husband, Dan Wolf, who's a very famous collector of art, came to Yonkers to look at the old 1926 jail that was located on our waterfront, he took the train up 22 minutes from Grand Central Station. And when he came up, he said, I work in Brooklyn. And I just thought to myself, why? Because I have this beautiful view. I can now walk to the old jail, and I go to work each and every single day. And that's what's happening. That's what's happening for me. Hopefully that's what's happening in their show. I see the mayor of Mount Vernon here. You know, we are all, it's hard to take advantage of the fact that, you know, New York City's grown as much as it can grow. Brooklyn is just too expensive. And so where else can people go? And they're finding out that our suburbs, our communities, are the places they can make it go, and also be very close to, we have train stations on either side of Yonkers. We have the New York State Thruway goes right down the middle of Yonkers, and we're less than 40 minutes to any major airport. What better place to live than in our portion of Westchester County? So
I see a lot of great things happening, especially with the millennials and their investment dollars, and we just want to continue the progress. But a lot of this, as much as I like to try to take as much credit as I can, because when you're married, you get credit for the good, you get credit for the bad, right? I'll take as much credit as I can, but really, this has been probably 2 or 3 administrations in the making, and we're finally starting to cash in on it now.
Thank you. Good. But I wonder if the developers or commissioner could cite an actual trend you're seeing on the ground. So we're hearing trends. Is there an example or something that you can say, yes, we're seeing this, and this is how we're seeing it, and how we're responding?
Someone mentioned it already, and it's the reverse commute pattern. And one of the trends, I worked at Metro North in the early 90s when we first put into place some of the reverse commute patterns and travel from the Bronx up to White Plains, Yonkers, Stamford. And at the time, that trend was primarily low-wage workers going to retail, going to individual homes. Now it is millennials that want to live in Manhattan and work in Stamford, work in White Plains. So I think, and then to the flip side of that is people that want to live in Yonkers, New Rochelle, and Mount Vernon and others can get to the city in 40 minutes. And I think we're starting to see a trend of no borders, where I heard on the radio this morning that New York, the 5 boroughs, is now at 8.5 million people. And that is the first time ever. And so it really is important that the development, the transportation investments, look at the regional aspects of it, as well as the individual communities. And I think that's a real positive trend.
Thank you.
My name is Henry Owenati, and I'm a private investor. I agree, I've been following this movement, and I very much agree with the principles. I have a concern, and I'm very interested in your thoughts on it, and that's the scale of the initiatives and the development, and whether there are risks to just focusing on the large projects.
I think you're definitely right, and I think the issue is, ideally you want to make those large developments broken down into lots of small pieces, so that you can, each separate piece stands on its own and then adds to the next one. One of the problems with these large master plans is if they're not thought of that way, and only hit the cycle to get the first 2 buildings up, and then the cycle's over, that they feel like they're on Mars. So you really have to think through that. It's one of the biggest challenges. Years ago, I worked on a site in New Jersey, the Colgate-Palmolive site. We had 24 acres on the waterfront, and it was a challenge to figure out how we're going to get that to happen, and especially on the back of a lot of very expensive insurance. That is a key factor.
Art?
Yeah, one of the things that we've always been looking for, we think is sign of health, is that you have institutional partners or institutional capital coming in some of these larger cities and building the large-scale projects. But you also you tell the health of the city when you can see that there's other repurposing of existing buildings and maybe tax incentives that actually make that private investment happen. So you have to have both. And we all, whenever we go into a city like that, that's talking about redevelopment, we sort of want to see that dynamic happen at both levels.
So I totally get the question. I have a friend who reports to me that every time he's on the Cross County Parkway and sees the towers in New Rochelle in the distance, he wants to throw up. And these are his words to me. And he says that recognizing, as he puts it, intellectually, that there's a value in those towers, but that they have shattered his illusions of what Westchester was all about. And the transition from perceiving of the suburbs as sort of dominated by a village setting exclusively, and reconceiving of them as places that in certain parts can have urban scale and urban density, has required a sort of psychological shift for lots of people, and it makes the politics of this a little bit choppy for people like Mike and myself and others in elected positions. Yet I think it's absolutely necessary. It's absolutely necessary because of the economics, Because without that density, you often cannot get the value necessary to attract the investment. It's absolutely necessary from the planning perspective, because if the New York area is going to need 4 million new people and 2 million new jobs, you're not going to be able to achieve that except through scale, because the other alternative is sprawl at the edges of the metropolitan area, which is a disaster for everyone. But you can mitigate it through some of the measures that Alex mentioned, through good design. You can make sure that even large structures have a human scale at the ground level, are inviting and warm, and by emphasizing the point that it's not about growing everywhere. 90% of New Rochelle, we want to preserve suburban land use characteristics. We want to preserve open space. And in fact, if you do this properly, the growth in the transit districts helps reduce the pressure on growth elsewhere and helps preserve the sort of greener, lower density environment that many people associate with suburbs and still want the suburbs to exemplify.
One last quick response.
Yeah, let me, since we've been focusing so much on New York, I want to give a shout out to the city of Norwalk. They, I think, have done an excellent job in looking at their city and targeting smaller but very complementary developments. The Waypoint development, the Wall Street development, and you know, they kind of recognize that you can't go in and do this major, big-scale development in a small city like that has smaller boundaries with right on the waterfront. So I think I think what the mayor said, what we've all been saying here, is that there is no one size fits all, and it really is the planning approach to make sure that things happen successfully.
The third major force that I want to talk about that sort of impact on these policies is the constant need for climate change-induced mitigation and resilience policies. We know about the storms, and they're only going to become stronger and more frequent. We know that climate change and droughts and massive rainfall and floods are actually the new norm. But there are a variety of ways to respond to this, and many of the ways involve basic land use and growth and development decisions. I watched with interest, for example, Governor Cuomo's decision to take $400 million of Sandy relief money and help homeowners move from where they were in the frequent storm area back and grow that instead as a surge area. I watched also with New Jersey said that they're going to build where they were as quick as they can, and they're going to be there. I'm guaranteeing the surge area is going to be working better than the rebuilt area in New Jersey. And there's a lot of little things. Even just basically looking at the building codes for new buildings and existing, I watched with amazement during the storm when I saw doctors and nurses heroically helping patients out of a number of the hospitals in New York City. I'm sure you all saw that as well on television. And the question immediately went through my mind is, this doesn't make any sense. They're all supposed to have instantaneous generators. I mean, if you're on an operating room, you want the generator to kick in right away. Where are all these instantaneous generators? And the answer is almost every single hospital built them in the basement. And what's the first place that floods in most storms? The basement. And a simple building code requirement that must be higher. Now, I say simple. One hospital administrator said, do you know how high it is, how hard it is to pump diesel up in terms of the fuel? But it's something that must be done, and these are the type of issues that must be addressed. They involve things like working with the state to change insurance policies. Insurance policies right now are required basically to subsidize the rebuilding in a known danger area. I don't know how many of you see every single year. It seems to me it's the same house on the Oregon, Washington coast, slowly falling into the Pacific Ocean. I think we're rerunning the same thing. It is actually a different house every time. And the reason being, the law started because they were trying to prevent redlining and discrimination. Now says if you offer a policy, you must offer it to everyone. Now you can have sometimes slightly higher premiums, but you must offer it to everyone. And so what you're doing is saying, we know this is going to collapse. We know there's going to be storms and flooding here, but that's okay. We'll insure you, and we'll have federal policy to back that up. Washington State, by the way, was one of the first states that just changed their program and said that in state-designated future endangerment areas, insurance companies are not required to offer this type of replacement insurance. The final force that I want to talk about briefly, and I believe is the most important, is the growing inequity facing this country. Smart growth has a strong and practical emphasis on equity. The shift in wealth for a smaller and smaller number of Americans is a force more powerful in many ways than all of the other ones we talked about. Just think about the often repeated statistic that the top 1% of the country owns more wealth than the bottom 90% of the country. Or that doing a 3-year period, and it's always easy to pick on them, but the Koch brothers' wealth grew by $33 billion, and now estimated at $85 billion. In that same period, HUD reported that the number of homeless children that are enrolled in our public school now exceeds 1 million children, the highest level ever recorded. 1 in 4 children in America lives in poverty. And I say these things because we must understand that a majority of Americans, not just the very poor, but the hardworking families that might be making $45,000 or $50,000 a year, that their source of income is not just the wages, and it's the other things that really come from so much of smart growth. Obviously, health support, but quality free public schools, parks, affordable transportation, affordable college. All of these are issues that are actually the income, if you will, for the average American. On transportation alone, working families under $50,000 spend as much as, on the average, a third of their income on transportation. Now, that is what walkability is all about. That is what transit accessibility is all about. When these programs are cut or they're administered poorly, the resources for a majority of American families are hit. And many of these resources depend on how and where we build. And they depend on things like transit and walkability and alternatives. I have seen this personally because I've worked with communities all over the country that are starting new light rail lines and bus rapid transit lines. And one of the things that's often led by the business community, one of the things that we emphasize is that this is going to, in terms of equity, open up jobs. It's going to give access to jobs and to housing. In reality, that is not what happens in many communities. You've heard the old term gentrification, but it's more than gentrification. What happens in an area, if you're not very careful in doing that transit-oriented development area, is that the prices become so expensive that the workers who live there are forced out and end up paying even more for transportation to get back to the jobs that we went in and helped develop under the name of equity. There's got to be a very conscious attention to this issue. And when I say there must be, it is because the inequality is growing. And that is why the anger in so many communities is growing. I made some comments in the Baltimore Sun shortly after the riots there that I did not believe that police-community relations was the only issue that is involved here. That in fact, we had many communities with extraordinary poverty and other challenges. Where the riots started, 51% of African-American males were unemployed. If you think about that, my comment was that even if we waved a wand and police-community relations were perfect from here on out, the first incident, like a car running off the road into the sidewalk, is going to produce this sense of anger because of frustration. We don't think of it all the time, but when we get around to where and how we're building, and how you have access, and how you have affordable housing, and how you have economic inclusion, those are the issues that are under our control that affects the growing inequality in America. I also tell people, if you watch the growing theatrics that we call presidential elections, these theatrics, one of the things that's interesting, though, is the extreme enthusiasm and even anger of both Senator Sanders and Mr. Trump. And you watch the rallies and everything else. The most fascinating thing is that a third of the voters for Sanders said they could see themselves voting for Trump, and the reverse is true as well. And why could that possibly be? Because they are dissatisfied with where they are in the system and feel out of control right now, which goes back to the very issues that we're talking about. Growing on these issues, how we grow can, in fact, help reduce the inequity and thereby have a huge impact on the future of this country.
I think from those comments, the governor is waving a few warning flags and highlighting some of the things we have to be careful about as we move into these issues and delve. And one of those was equity. So how do we make equity work from a developer standpoint? What are the methods that we think are workable to make sure we don't encounter gentrification? Comments?
Equity work, why don't you explain what you mean by
So the governor was pointing out that the concern about gentrification, one of the criticisms of TOD is that often, higher income populations are moving to these areas and the folks for the jobs that need to be close to their transit are being displaced. So how do we include them in the process, in the housing, and avoid that confusion? Maybe one of the mayors want to comment.
That's always a big question, and it's a complicated one at best, but you have to look at what local communities are doing. In the city of Yonkers, as many of you all know, Show Me a Hero that HBO put forth about Yonkers and desegregation of its neighborhoods and its schools, both 30 years ago. Just 3 short years ago, the city council passed, by unanimous consent, Republicans and Democrats, passed a local housing ordinance. First time in 30 years. So we are moving forward in dealing with these issues. And this ordinance is a type of ordinance that will encourages buy-in by the developers. And that's, of course, something that we want. We're also passed a green building ordinance. Again, same thing, trying to get use a carrot approach versus the stick, getting developers to buy in to be a part of it. Yonkers is a unique city, but Yonkers is a very diverse city that celebrates its diversity. And of course, when you think about the developments happening on our waterfront, remember, Yonkers is an old manufacturing city, right? It was our water's edge, full of brownfields. No one was living there. So we replaced brownfields, as Wilson always tells me, with home fields. And so now we have the people moving in, and people moving in and they're spending dollars. And what better thing can you do for a community, especially some of the communities that we have in my city, we have 30% unemployment. You bring additional people in who have incomes, who have a way of spending money, and that, of course, when they say that the harbor, the water goes up, all the boats go up with it, well, that's what we're looking for. We're looking for those investments. We want a community that everyone can be a part of, but we also want a community where the tide will go up so everyone will benefit from the new developments in the city.
This is my only observation about that. I think we need to have some humility about the capacity of land use decisions to serve as a cure-all for all of our social and economic ills. I'm part of one of the working groups that's developing RPA's 4th regional plan, and we had one session going through all sorts of different growth scenarios and measuring them by lots of different metrics. One of which was how much of the new population will be living in high-performing school districts. And in one scenario, 10% lived in high-performing school districts. In another scenario, 25% lived in high-performing school districts. So you can say, well, the 25% is better, but what does that really suggest? Under all scenarios, at least 75% are in low-performing school districts. And so if we want to get a handle on the issues the governor mentioned, we've got to confront it directly at the level of schooling, directly at the level of families, directly at the level of all the social policies that we have.